My name is Jake Field. I'm an expedition leader, adventure travel guide, and the founder of Ultimate Adventure Travel. Over the years, I have helped hundreds of people step out of their comfort zone and into some of the world's most incredible places: Kilimanjaro, Everest Base Camp, and the Inca Trail. But this podcast isn't just about the destinations, it's about what happens on the trail: the friendships you build, the challenges you overcome, and the confidence that you gain. So welcome to the Ultimate Adventure Travel Podcast. This is your weekly guide to preparing for unforgettable group adventures and getting the most out of every single one. In each episode, I'll share practical advice, inspiring stories from past travellers, and expert interviews. We'll cover training tips, altitude prep, packing, planning, mindset, and all the things no one tells you before you sign up. Whether you're planning your very first trip or you're the one in the group who's always got another adventure lined up, this podcast is here to help you feel confident, ready, and excited about what's ahead. So hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you want to get started today, you'll find free downloadable guides to some of our most popular trips linked in the show notes, or head straight over to ultimateadventuretravel.co.uk to see where we're heading next. Thanks for being here. Let's get into it. Wolfy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It is a pleasure to have you on.
Pleasure to be here, mate. Thank you.
For people listening, who is Wolfy? What's your background?
So I am a personal trainer. I have been doing so for about 11 years, I think now. Prior to that, I have always worked in and around sport, predominantly in coaching. I think I started when I was 14 at school. I did a little coaching qualification to be able to coach my peers and other students at the school. And then I think my first proper sporting qualification was I became an archery instructor at about 16, which I think is the youngest you can do it. And then I've got qualifications now in football, rugby, basketball, handball, canoeing, cycling. It just goes on and on and on. But when I was around about 30, that'd be 11 years ago, I landed in PT, because I think at that point in my life, I had started to look more at rehabilitation work and then what we would call prehabilitation work. So trying to not get injured, and then looking predominantly at the movements. And then that led into the gym, and then how to strengthen, how to stretch, and build on that. I mean, I should probably throw out there, done a sports science degree at one point, but I forgot most of that quite quickly, as you often do, and had to relearn a lot of that. But that's kind of how I ended up where I am now.
Is that something that you always thought you were going to end up in? Has there always been an interest in being a PT, or did it lead on from all of the physical activities that you were doing before and it was a natural progression?
Yeah, I'd say it was more the natural progression. I mean, I was lucky enough when I was a child. I could probably ride a horse before I could walk. So that was my first sort of physical exertion sort of experience, was horse riding. And I did that competitively until I was about 13. And then fell out of love, as lots of children do, you know, with one activity, and just progressed into another, and then another, and then another. I went back to horse riding in my late 20s, early 30s. And I think, again, it's that movement for me. I need to be moving all the time. So an office job was never on the cards for me, much to everyone in my circle sort of disappointment. But I've managed to find ways of enjoying life, and where I need to, monetizing what I do to stay afloat. But really, it's the enjoyment of movement. It's just being, if I can be, outdoors and active and moving.
And you now have your own business as a PT. And how long have you had that business?
Yeah, so that's probably not quite, that's more like 9 years. I think when I first decided to do personal training, I went and worked in a gym for 2. I mean, technically that still is your own business, because you pay a rental and everything to be there and have the space. But I didn't really consider it to be my own until I came out of that environment and started working in my own setup, visiting people coming to me, and running it then in every sense, you know, even down to, you know, the boring jobs of cleaning and maintenance. But once you're in charge of every element of something, it really does feel like it's yours.
Yeah, I totally understand what you mean. And I know we met just over a year ago now through our shared love of adventure travel. And having seen what you've been up to with the PT stuff, obviously I follow your business. You're now working with us at Ultimate Adventure Travel for helping coach people through to be able to tick off those big adventure holidays like Everest Base Camp and Kilimanjaro. It was something that I was really keen to have a conversation with you about, because I've started taking my fitness a lot more seriously over the last few years. When I first started getting into expeditions, it was something that you got fit on the job, if that made sense. So nobody really spoke to me about training prior to any of these trips. It was one of those where if you worked in the outdoors, you were naturally fit because that's what you spent all of your time doing. So I never really thought about it. And then it's only been in the last few years that I started taking it a bit more seriously. And what I think is going to be really interesting for people listening is the correlation between exercising at home and that work that you do in the gym, and how that relates to life on expedition. Because I've sometimes found that the advice that I've had from PTs, yourself not included, has not always related to expeditions. So maybe you can just give us a little bit of a brief overview. Firstly, how you ended up getting involved in climbing Kilimanjaro last year, and then secondly, what your experience has been in terms of fitness in the gym versus fitness outdoors.
Yeah, absolutely. So we ended up going to Kilimanjaro together because I am part of a charity group called strongmen.org. They are a men's bereavement charity. So unfortunately for me, 11 years ago now, I lost my mum, and I didn't really cope that well. I've got 3 siblings, so we all experienced grief. We all went through it at the same time. But comparatively, they seemed to cope a lot better, and I went off the rails a little bit. And my dad found Strongmen, and he put me in contact with them, and I met Ephraim, who's the founder, who you now know very well as well. And we sparked up a friendship, and over the years, he and the other guys have helped me exponentially. And then one of the things we do as an organisation is we get guys out in the mountains in Wales, both north and south, and we go and do physical activity based things, usually outside as a group, as a way of allowing conversation to naturally open up, naturally flow. But also, I think because it challenges people, and it challenges people in a different way. And there's a lot to be said for the way in which having some sort of success you weren't necessarily geared up for or thought you would have has for your mental well-being and how you then view and perceive things. And to do it in a group setting where everybody is there for the same reason, and in this case, the same reason being you've all experienced grief and struggled with it, it forms bonds that can't really be described, and gives you friendships that then mean you've got people to turn to in those dark moments if you still have them. And it just really has been a journey with them. We were celebrating 5 years of being a charity, as you're having charitable status, and everyone wanted to do something big. And like I say, we'd done mountains in Wales. And obviously the natural progression and jump from that is to go, why not go and do the tallest freestanding mountain in the world? Makes perfect sense. So I should probably point out, you won't mind me for saying this, that conversation did start at a charity event where a few of us were a little bit inebriated. And that might have been the spark that lit the touch paper. You know, credit to him and to his team. They went and explored the avenues and obviously ended up being in touch with you. And between the two of you pulled together a trip, and where I think, was it 24, 25 of us in total in the end? Made our
20
way.
to 25.
Yeah. So that's how we ended up at Kilimanjaro. But yeah, I mean, obviously in the build up to that, then there were different conversations and different thoughts amongst the group about preparation. Obviously from a traveling point of view, or going on an adventure sort of point of view, we leaned heavily on you and your experiences. And obviously we had the Zoom calls with yourself where you talked through kit and prep work. But a lot of the guys did pick my brains about not necessarily what I thought they should do, but what I was actually doing myself, to be ready for that trip. And I spent quite a bit of time doing some reading and looking around what I might need to do to prepare, because doing a physical challenge was never going to be too scary for me. The thought of that just lights up all the synapses in my brain, and I'm good to go. knowing how to do it. It's like I say, it's a different thing. Being on your feet for a weekend, going up and down the trails of still quite tall peaks in Wales. 1,000 meters is still 1,000 meters. You don't sniff at it. That at the end of that, you're going to sit down, have a cup of coffee, maybe have a shower, have a bath. You can get up and down in a day, in half a day, and you can have a lot of your creature comforts with you. We knew primarily from talking to you that we were going to be on the go for 7 odd days straight. And a lot of those days were going to be hard. And more than that, there wasn't those little comfortable moments at the end. You didn't get to your stop point and instantly go and get in a hot bath or a hot shower. You couldn't sit in a nice big comfy memory foam mattress for the night. That wasn't going to happen. Any physical, not so much issues, but anything physical that was coming up in that time, you were going to carry with you all the way up and all the way back down for a few days. So really, when I was looking at it, the important thing was to be prepared for that. I suppose the easiest thing to draw sort of a similarity to is if you ever listen to any of the great marathon runners talk about, preparation for a marathon. Yes, you need to have a base level of fitness if you want to do well. That's a given. But actually, most of the training they do is training for the afterwards. It's for the recovery. Mm. So I was looking at what we were doing similarly to that. It was, what do I need to do to be able to feel recovered quick enough to get up and go again? That was going to be the key thing. And on any of the expeditions or trips that you do, that's going to be the thing. And like, you said in the introduction about there's this sort of almost unspoken or unwritten notion that, you get fit on the trail, you get fit on the expeditions, and then you carry that over. And I think the fitness required to do the feat, by and large, you probably already have. What you don't necessarily have if you're doing it for the first time, or if you've not done anything for a long time, is the recovery, and it is the ability to recover quickly. So when you start looking into that, there are obviously physical things you can do in training, but it's also just making sure, and it's the obvious things that people always get wrong, and you won't, because it's become part of your daily existence because you've done it the whole time. But it is staying hydrated, making sure you get enough sleep. If you don't do those things, everything else is going to be worse. And on our trip, I experienced it at the very end before summit night, where just because of my personality as much as anything, I got super excited. And probably, I think that summit night, I think I was awake across the time for about 36 hours straight. I literally didn't sleep. And the thing that then became very difficult is mentally, when you're doing the hardest part of the whole trip, and physically the hardest part with the last climb, that's when it got hard. And it's hard anyway, but it got even harder because I was actually exhausted, and not exhausted because I hadn't trained enough or exhausted because I wasn't fit enough. I was exhausted because I hadn't slept. And then all the little demons start creeping up. So a large part of the prep work is making sure that I think you are prepared and know how to make yourself recover. So I learned on this particular trip with you, I didn't have, and I will for the next time, an eye mask, earplugs. I know they were on the list, but you sit there and you think, I've never needed these things before. I just fall asleep. But I did need them. And had I had them, I might have had better recovery day to day, ready to go the next day. So I think that as a start is the most important thing, because I think then when you get into what I do more, and then the training side of things, everything that you can do will have a benefit. So there are obviously specific exercises that I can and will mention that are useful to do. Genuinely, having just a good general level of fitness helps. So I think, from where we've spoken before and where we're, looking at the programming that we would offer to people coming on your trips, I think how I see a good "you're going on a trip" program would look, it would be the information necessary about recovery, because most of that is information based that we've just gone through, and just making good habits. And then I think it would be talking about general fitness to start with. So although it's not what everybody probably wants to hear, because you want to think more specifically, I do think in the beginning, it obviously it depends where you're starting from, but if you're someone who has never been much of a gym goer or not the most active, your first port of call is getting on your feet. And I'd be saying, as I'm sure you would, getting the boots that you're going to be wearing on your trip, if you haven't already got them, and putting the miles in and just getting out and walking, and start simple. Walk on the flat, walk to the shops and back. I mean, it's one of the things that I did do in preparation for Kili to get used to the backpack was I started walking to my supermarket. I shrunk my shop a little bit, but would get as much into my pack as possible and then walk back with my pack. And I might have looked ridiculous because I was doing my shopping in hiking boots with a proper mountain rucksack, but there was a purpose to it, because the things that I needed to know for me that I could do beyond just being fit enough was, can I cope with that backpack when I don't want it on? Can I cope with those boots when I don't really want them on? And building that in. Once you've got that all ticking over in a good degree of fitness, or if you're starting from a higher place, ironically, I think cycling is brilliant. One of the things I didn't do it for Kili, but I'm doing it for our next trip, is I've started to cycle in a mask, in a little rebreather. So all it does is limit the amount of oxygen that I can gulp in when I'm working hard. But as much as it's not the same as being at altitude, it's probably the easiest way to attempt to replicate it when here. And I tried doing that in the gym before Kili. I tried to train in a mask. I'm not convinced it's the best way. I mean, I'm sure there'd be people that would disagree with me, but I look at it and I go, if I'm doing a strength and conditioning session where I'm using weights, actually, I don't want my oxygen restricted when I'm throwing weights around. If I'm on a treadmill, not a problem. If I'm on an exercise bike, not even a rowing machine, not a problem. But if I'm using the weights, actually, it's not sensible to be restricting, your oxygen flow. So I quickly knocked that on the head when I was training for Kili. But for our next one, even though we're not going as high for Tupkow, I'm now cycling with that on, just to remind my body what it's like to be working hard with a reduced oxygen intake. The final sort of thread to all of this, going to the weights, specific exercises that I think are really good. Farmers carries, which anyone that knows what they are will be like, why? But just, although it is very much a grip strength exercise, you're carrying two weights of equal mass in your hands and walking up and down. It's the walking, it's the load on your joints, your hips, your knees, your ankles. And it's the discomfort, which is something I'm going to come back to. But farmers walks are brilliant. And then actually what you can do if you've got the landscape around you is start doing farmers walks sort of over obstacles. It might sound silly, but if you've got little dips and hills in your garden, your garden's multi-leveled, walking up and down that, so you're having to do a step here, a step there, it starts to mimic the terrain of where you're going to be. And it's uncomfortable. There's the discomfort. So it starts to factor in more than just the physical element of what you're trying to do. There's the mental element of what it's going to be like comes in. And then similarly, I saw a lot of information about box jumps and plyometric training, which is something that I love. But plyometric training in the build up to an expedition, you're running a risk of injury. Stepping up and down on a box, again, it seems really boring. But the movement that you're going to replicate over and over and over again on a climb is stepping up and down. So to step up and down on a box, on a bench, these are the movements that we want to replicate. We want to replicate them under load, under strain. So again, whether it's just holding kettlebells, dumbbells, wearing your pack, whatever it may be, these simple movements are the ones that are going to serve you best. And then the final thing I'll throw in there, because I've waffled on for quite a bit there, the obvious thing, beyond everything I've just said about general fitness and those couple of specific exercises, core strength. I mean, everybody hears it when someone starts talking about the gym, but the stronger your core is, and we're not just talking sit-ups, the stronger your core is, the more comfortable everything else is going to be. You're going to be carrying a pack, potentially, depending on what trip you're doing, you're going to be carrying a pack for 5, 6, 7 hours a day. And obviously you tell everyone to keep it light, but it's still got a weight. Your core is what takes that weight. Your core is what takes that load and spreads it while everything else is working. So the stronger your core is, the less of a negative impact that pack and that weight is going to have. And obviously, as you would know, if your trip involves staying out rather than having someone carry your stuff for you, that's going to be even more of an issue. I threw a lot at you there.
No, that's brilliant. I'm going to try and go over some of that stuff because you've made so many good points. And there's a lot in there that I'm currently saying to people, and there's a few bits in there that I'm not. And I think that's really good as well, because the whole point of you coming on here is that I'm going to learn so much stuff as well. I think every single time we talk about fitness when it comes to training for expeditions, a lot of it's going to depend on the person, but advice is always going to be different. There's always going to be things that we can learn. So that's been brilliant. When it comes to recovery, that's so key, as you were saying. Something that I've been preaching for a long time now is it's about making sure that you're training for a marathon and not a sprint. Now, I'm not the fittest person that goes on these trips. I've definitely had people on the trips who are far fitter than me. There will be exercises without a doubt that you would smoke me in. I'm not even going to claim that I would be fitter than, at like 95% of the things than you are. One of the things that I am quite good at, and this comes down to the very specific training that I've done by doing these trips over and over again, is recovery. Now, I've always said to people, it's not about when you hike for 20 hours carrying a 20-kilo pack, and beast yourself up and over these mountains. Actually, what it's about is, can you go for 5 to 8 hours every single day and do that for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on the type of trip that you're doing? And that's going to make a huge difference. If you're waking up the next day feeling refreshed and feeling energized, and you can do that distance again, whereas other people are slowly deteriorating, then when it does come to that summit, because the thing about Kilimanjaro is you're doing the hardest bit right at the end. And there was a really good analogy that I heard a little while ago, which is most athletes will train for a year to perform on one day at their best. Whereas if you're doing expeditions or you're climbing mountains, you will train for a year to perform on 7 days at your worst. And it's that kind of perception of, actually, if you climb Kilimanjaro, when you need your fitness the most is when you've had the least amount of sleep, when you haven't been eating properly for a few days prior, when you've already done miles and miles and miles on those legs. So that recovery is so important. And if you can build that into your training, that's going to be key. The other thing that you said, and I'm really keen to go into this just as a roundup so people can take away that information, because I think it was so good, is the small changes that you can make at home that have big impacts out on the trail. And they're things, as you've said, wearing your boots and going to do your shop. They are standing up on public transport if you commute somewhere for work. They are getting your steps in every single day. If you can hit those 10,000 steps a day, just spending more time on your feet. If you work in an office, can you spend more time on your feet at a standing desk, for instance? Small changes like that will have a massive impact on your ability on the trail. So yeah, I really like the points that you've made there. And for anyone listening, if you are feeling self-conscious about loading up your rucksack and doing your shopping, I've done it. You've done it, as you said. So many people. There's a really famous climber who does exactly the same thing. He's always walking around with his rucksack on, because you're replicating or you're simulating the situation that you're going to be in your training. And I think that's something that can sometimes be overlooked. People will take it to a really complicated level by doing some fancy exercises in the gym, but realistically, the best thing is going to be doing what your exercise is over and over and over again. So if you're climbing Kilimanjaro, get out and climb as many mountains as you can before you go. Finally, then, we've come on to talking about some of the different exercises. And I'm really keen to get your opinion now on what would a good working week look like in terms of training for an Everest Base Camp trip or a Kilimanjaro trip. How, if I've got no idea, let's say I work a standard 9 to 5 job, I've got no idea about how to structure my workout split or anything like that, but I've got this adventure that I want to train for. How can I start going about structuring that week?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there is an element of sort of specificity that comes into this, which is like for the individual. So I go back to what I said prior. It depends where you're starting from. But as a general, if we say that person is, to be wanting to go on that trip, let's make the assumption that they're not sedentary. They do have a modestly active lifestyle. If that was the case, then like I said, I'd go back to the very beginning. I'd be saying, right, let's have one session a week where it's not weighted, but it's in your kit. So it could be that we're saying, again, it'd be depending on the individual, but if you're living somewhere that's got hills, I'd be saying one session a week, maybe even the first session of every week. You get in your boots, you load up your pack, you go out for as long as you're able to. If someone's only got an hour, that's fine. If someone's got 3, even better. If you're somewhere that's very flat, so you've not got a lot of hills to climb, I still think getting out in those boots is key. And I would then go a step further and say, you might feel self-conscious about this, but find a quiet spot, go and walk. This is the thing. You could go and walk for 20 minutes in your boots. You've not even gone very far. Come across a park bench. No one's around. Spend 10 minutes stepping up and down on that bench. See if you can do 10 minutes. That's the first thing. I mean, that sounds very simple, but I'm telling you now, that's a lot harder than it sounds. But if you've just walked 20 minutes, stepped up and down on a bench for 10 minutes and then walked home 20 minutes, you'll probably have burnt more calories than most people do in their gym workout anyway. You've got used to your boots and that movement that you're going to be doing. And we've not even really started working at that point, but that's what it's like on the trails. The first part of your day before you've even started working, you may have gone up 1,000-meter elevation over 2 hours and you've still got like a lot more to come. Yeah. So that's how I'd start it off. I'd literally, maybe my first session, let's say it's a Monday, that would be my first session. Then the Tuesday, if we're going to go like this, I would be straight into the gym. And if let's say in this conversation, let's make it 3 gym sessions a week, because I think that's manageable. So I'd be going in and I'd be looking at doing probably a lower body one straight away. Now, the reason for that, and to make this very specific to what we're doing, if we've just done some sort of, very low impact, but in our gear stuff on the Monday, I don't want us to rest on that. I want us to go straight into something a bit more intense the next day, because again, it's going to replicate more what we're doing when we're out there. And it could be a simple session where maybe we focus on some squats, probably more split squats than standard squats. So for those that don't know what I'm talking about, when you squat, you're basically attempting to sit down without sitting down and then standing up with weight. If you split squat, you're splitting your stance. So it's more like you're in what you'd think to be a lunge, and then you're going up and down without bringing your legs together, and you're holding that position, going up and down for a set of reps, and then you change legs and you do the other side. The benefit of doing it in a split squat stance is that you are going to be making those joint actions a little bit more bulletproof. You're working, we call them synergists, the supporting muscular structure around the main muscles to work. And you're also being a little bit more specific to an individual muscle rather than a pair of muscles at any given time. But it means that you're going to be you're working in a slightly more robust way for what you're going to be doing. And also when you're walking up and down a mountain, you don't tend to do it with 2 feet at the same time. It's 1 foot forward, then the other 1 foot. So again, there's that replication going on. But you might have a session that's built around that as your main movement. But what we'd probably do is also some, as I said before, some steps up and down on a box with load. We might do some Bulgarian split squats. So that's where we have an elevated foot. We'd go lighter, and it just makes the movement a little bit deeper. You get a greater range of motion. It's also harder, but we do it at lighter weight. Something we hadn't mentioned that I'd also possibly throw in there, though, is if you've seen a gym Bosu ball, so like a half ball with a platform, it's a balance ball. Practicing standing on there. If you can stand on there, squat on there. If you can squat on there, try and squat with one leg. Like, always make something harder. Again, it depends where you're starting from, but whatever you can do, try and do something that challenges you. If you haven't got a half gym ball, you can do kneeling exercises. So again, as simple as if you've got a big spherical gym ball, if you kneel on it without holding on to anything, and you can hold that without wobbling and falling off, that workout is going to be hitting all of the muscular structure around your hip flexors and your quads and your glutes and your abdominals and your core. That little movement, which you might just be doing, holding, I don't know, 5 sets of 40 seconds, that's going to do so much good for you. So that would be like your Tuesday session. Wednesday, I mean, I'm a bit extreme, but Wednesday, I might then get out, like I said, get out on the bike if you've got a bike, or go for another walk. That one doesn't necessarily have to be in the gear. That's just because, going back to what we were saying, it's being able to actively recover is what we're really saying. It's not about necessarily being recovered the next day, but it's being able to continue to recover whilst you're still moving. So it's an active recovery. Moving into Thursday, back in the gym, you don't use your upper body as much, depending on the type of trip you're doing. I mean, I'm sure if you were going all out Everest to the top, you might need a bit more upper body strength, but you still don't want that imbalance. And also, going back to the simple things like your pack and so on and so forth, having a bit of upper body strength is still useful. And the whole time you're training, you are improving your energy systems, you're improving your own endurance anyway. So it's all beneficial, but that would give your lower legs, your lower limbs, a chance to recover for a day. And then into the Friday, again, I would be looking at it as doing something that is movement based, whether that be back into your gear for a hike if you want to be really specific, back out on the bike if you just want to do your cardiovascular endurance, or the one that everyone always misses, swimming, because that works everything. You've got resistance because of the water, but you're working every muscle group. But going back to the idea of recovery, if you're not an Olympic athlete swimming, it's a good recovery activity. And then the Saturday, jumping to the end of the week for me, I would then be looking to do a total body session. So that's where I might be looking at giving someone a HIIT session that's 20 minutes long, or a circuit, something that's going to hit a bit of everything. Nothing as big and specific as maybe the split squats we'd said we'd do on the Tuesday, but a total body. And then I'd suggest not doing anything on a Sunday. And with that, even if it's your very first week, there is a way of making that work for everybody. And it might sound horrendous, but we can tailor all of those sessions right down, regress them right down to a very manageable amount. But the key bit being very quickly getting you to go, I'm going Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, because it's that continuation that's the really key bit.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make when training for their trips is that they expect to have lots of time. So they put it off and they put it off. And I've been guilty of it myself. I can think of trips where I've said to myself, right, I will train for that, but I've got a bit of time and I'm really busy at the moment and I'm not prioritizing it. And suddenly that trip is 3 weeks away. And there's not a lot that you can do in 3 weeks. But actually, if you start, the best time to start is now. If you start right at the beginning and you begin training for those trips, then even if you have a few days or a week where you go on holiday or you can't get it or you get ill, you've got that contingency, and it's something you build up. So there's a couple of things that can make that easier. I think if you're thinking about booking a trip, once you've booked it, the motivation to train is far higher because you have that deadline. And if you do have a trip in place, then making sure that you prioritize the training because it will come around quickly. Some of the training that you've spoken about, I think, is so important. And a lot of people will ask me or refer to their training sessions and they'll mention about the Stairmaster. And I've started saying to a lot of people now, exactly like we've just been talking about, swap the Stairmaster for a box. It might sound really boring. It might sound like something that isn't going to make a huge amount of difference, but I'll tell you why it does. And it's because, as you've said before, it trains that full range of motion. And the key thing for me is it trains the downwards motion. So the leg in a centric. I'm trying to get too technical
you
now.
got eccentric, concentric, but because you've got two sets of muscles working, one's doing one and one's doing the other. But it is that downward phase. You are nailing it. It is almost more important. So if we're looking, without getting too technical, we're looking at a box. Essentially, if we're just training for training's sake, the most efficient and effective way of getting onto that box is to jump. So it's plyometric. But the most important part of a jump, and this is where everyone goes wrong, is not the jump, it's the landing. and all the magic happens in the landing. Yes, you need to have acceleration, you need to have power, you need to have some strength for those things to happen to get off the floor and onto the box, but you need to be able to land. And it's what happens when you land that makes all the difference to your physiology. And similarly, if you're not jumping on that box, you're stepping onto that box, which is what we would be suggesting for most people. When you step off that box, and again, I'm going to reiterate that bit, we don't jump off the box. When we step off the box, that deceleration that happens as our foot makes contact with the floor, and then the range of motion we go through as everything cushions and protects ourselves as we land back on the floor, that's the really important bit. That's the bit that's going to stop you from getting an injury when you're out and doing it. I mean, we can never make these things 100% not going to happen, but we can do a lot of the work. And if you're then repeating that movement, up, down, up, down, up, down, you're getting that pattern in place. You're getting your body to work the way you want it to. Put it onto the Stairmaster. Yes, you're right, you don't have the down, so you lose the most important part. But also, because it's a mechanized system, the rhythm is there, the pattern is there, and if you do it repetitively and do it a lot, yes, you'll improve your cardiovascular endurance. Yes, there is a lot of muscular gains you can get from using a Stairmaster. It's a hideous piece of kit that's very, very good. It's mechanized and got a pattern, and that pattern is not going to be replicated on the. We think about the scree sides of Kilimanjaro when you're getting to the top. It's not a stable footing. So if your whole training has been step onto a platform that doesn't do anything other than step onto a platform, there's no leeway in what you've done for that slide. Now, okay, you don't slide off a box, but when you step up onto a box and you have to step down, you're not looking. You're having to trust that you're going to find the floor at the bottom of that box. And you do it repeatedly and you start to learn that. And although you might argue the height is always the same, you can always move the box around to make it taller and to mix it up, but it's still more lifelike than the Stairmaster. So it is a better exercise.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you were saying as well about if you can incorporate some form of balancing exercise, mobility exercise, that's going to make a big difference as well, because I have seen people incredibly fit who have injured themselves on day one. And that kind of plays into, recovery is brilliant, but if you can prevent the injury from happening in the first place, that's even better. Your aim as well before you go away on one of these trips should be to bulletproof your knees, bulletproof your ankles, really spend a lot of time with that mobility. And I think by doing exercises where you haven't necessarily got a straight motion up and down, you have to stabilize yourself. That's going to become far better at replicating what it's like hiking on a trail. And that goes back to, we've broken down a working structure or a workout plan for the week. On that weekend, if you're able to, that's where I suggest to people go somewhere like the Lake District, Wales, Brecon Beacons, Peak District, even your local park, wherever you can, try and get out for multiple days in a row. So if you can do 2 days of hiking that's around about 5 to 8 hours, and I know that that's going to sound really difficult, but if you've got family, make it a family day out, have a picnic halfway through. It'll be some extra weight in your bag, which is also good. So whatever you can do, try and get Saturday and Sunday every now and again as long hiking days. And then the rest of the time, as we've been saying, focus on those key movements and the mobility as well.
I'd also jump in and say that, for anyone listening to this that might think we're being really clever and doing a sales pitch for training, beyond that, I'd look at it this way. If you're someone, you're saying about people getting injured, and it does happen, but if you're someone that has experienced injury in the past, or maybe is already carrying a bit of an injury, if you leave any kind of training to the last minute, you're probably going to be very uncomfortable on the trip if you make it there. And and whether anything bad happens or not, it'll be on your mind. It'll be in your mind. Now, as someone who has injured themselves millions of times, I mean, there isn't a part of my body that isn't broken on a daily basis. One of the things I did do and will always do before going away is not just put my body through its paces, but experiment with what I can do to make it less painful. So if you're someone that's going away in 3 months and you're umming and ahhing about whether or not you need a training plan or to get fit, regardless of whether you want to reach out to someone and have it structured for you, what you should be doing is testing your body in multiple movements. If you know you've got a dodgy knee or you've had a dodgy knee, test it. Because if you cause yourself a discomfort 3 months before you go away and you have to go and splash out a little bit of money on some physio, or you get recommended a really good, I mean, I did Kilimanjaro in a knee brace, I should probably point out, because I needed it underneath everything. You know, I had time to test that out, to make sure I had one that was comfortable. I mean, we say about the boots, we say about all of these other things, but if you've got a great big tight strapping around a joint and you haven't been out wearing that for multiple hours, you don't know how that's going to rub. You don't know how that's going to feel. And the last thing you want on the trip is that negativity setting in. Am I even going to be able to do this? Oh my God, this thing's so uncomfortable, I can't do it. Because there are challenges that you're going to face on that trip that you just don't need those voices in your head as well. So if nothing else, using that time beforehand, the time doing the consecutive days, the time doing the training to test out your own body is as important as anything else, I would say. And being able to test the sorts of extra equipment, the aids that you might need is equally important. And, you know, don't be shy about it. Everybody who isn't, you know, under 25 going on these trips has probably got something that aches a bit or hurts a bit. You know, why not make that element of your trip slightly easier, beyond obviously making yourself more bulletproof and robust and all of the things we've already said? Even just using that time to make sure that any pre-existing condition is managed is equally important. And I think certainly for older people who might be wanting to do these trips, you've got all the access to them. It's not, age doesn't stop you doing this, but not looking after yourself will limit your success. And that's the really important bit. And all of what we're talking about really is about making sure that you are in the best physical condition to enjoy yourself as much as possible, as opposed to just being fit for fit's sake or whatever. That's where it really is important.
What would you say to somebody who sat here maybe thinking, I'm too old to go and do a trip like this? I'm too old. I'm not fit enough. I'm carrying injuries from 20 years ago. What advice would you have for them?
I mean, I can understand why someone might think that, but rather than just give advice, what I'd say is when I first got the opportunity to go to Kilimanjaro, I had a client who, I could say his name, no one knows, a client called Richard, who was training with me at the time, and he had bad knees. He had a shoulder injury from 30, 40 years ago from playing rugby. He was quite overweight. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. And he was in his 60s, late 60s. And I remember saying to him, I've got this opportunity to climb Kilimanjaro. And he went, you should stop me, cut me off straight away. You've got to go on that trip. And I was like, well, you know, no, you've got to go on that trip. And I was like, well, he goes, even if I have to give you some money towards it, you have to go on that trip. And I was like, okay. And he goes, I did Kilimanjaro. And I was expecting this to be a story of, like, you know, when he was in his 30s. He'd done it about 6 years before he'd met me. So with needing 2 replacement knees, a replacement hip, dodgy shoulder, massively overweight, in his 60s, he just decided to go and do it. And the whole thing for him was he had to prove to himself he could do it. And he did. He got to the top and back down. And the stories he told me were horrendous, but he did it. And he did it without training, without guidance, without looking to make it easy for himself. And although none of you know who Richard is, I'm telling you now, if Richard can do it, you know, anyone can. So if there's any part of you that wants to go and do this, that wants to go and experience it, there is nothing stopping you. You should absolutely do it. And then obviously the sensible thing is to listen to the advice we are giving and to take some sort of action to make it easier. But bar a very unfortunate accident happening in the build up to you going away, there isn't really anything to stop you doing it. Age is not a factor. You will back me up on this, having done it several times. You know, the mantra of the guides in Tanzania is pole, pole, slowly, slowly. And it is a very slow trek. The physical side of it, in terms of how fit you have to be, how, you know, the things that you might think age would restrict you on, it doesn't. It's more mental. And then nothing that a decent bit of, you know, physical prep can't can't get you ready for, really. I personally, I mean, I want to do it again. We haven't spoken about this yet, but I want to do it again. It is worth it. It's worth any amount of pre-training to go and do it. So I think just bite the bullet.
I think it's interesting what you just said there about how it's a mental game. And I've always said to people, Kilimanjaro is mostly a mental climb. It's something that I would say is achievable for the majority of people, provided you have a good mindset, provided you have the mental willpower and determination to push through that summit night. And, you know, people hear the stories about how horrendous it is, and it's a long night. I think that's what makes it difficult is, as we've been saying, it's off the back of multiple days of hiking. But if you've got that mental resilience, what I'll say as a caveat to that is the fitter you are, the more enjoyable it will be. And that's kind of been the theme that we've been talking about is mental resilience will get you to the top, but your physical fitness will make the difference between how enjoyable that process is. Now, I know we've spoken a lot about Kilimanjaro, and obviously that was the last big expedition that you've done. And all the things that we're talking about are applicable to that, but also lots of other expeditions. Mount Toubkal, which we've got coming up in September, Everest Base Camp, Machu Picchu, even slightly less physical adventure holidays. So, you know, for instance, we've got a trip to Slovakia where you can go hiking around the mountains in Slovakia and go bear watching. And if you go in the winter, you can stay in an igloo. So there's lots of different adventure holidays out there. All of this training is going to make a huge difference to your enjoyment. But having been on Kilimanjaro, and I'm going to use this as, you know, very similar to Everest Base Camp, Toubkal, Machu Picchu, but having been in an environment like that and having seen other people and what they've been struggling with, what's one thing that you wish you knew before you went?
I mean, I think, as you will remember, I don't think you'll forget my summit night for quite some time. Lots was said to me about altitude before I went, you know, without trying to inflate my own ego. I knew fitness wasn't going to be a problem for me. I'm pretty resilient, so I knew that injury, unless I did something stupid and broke a leg or something, probably wasn't going to stop me. And I thought that I was mentally quite tough, but I didn't do any of the things that were offered beforehand to experience altitude. I decided to go in blind with that one. And the first time the altitude sickness hit me, which was when we went to Zebra Rock, as I remember telling you, so not even anywhere near the summit, I felt horrendous. And I genuinely, that was the first time that doubt crept into my mind, like genuine doubt. Because the thing is, not being fit enough is uncomfortable. Carrying any form of injury that's still manageable is uncomfortable. And a phrase that I was going to throw out there is, like, in terms of your training, what you're really training for is to be comfortable in discomfort, because that is what's going to happen. Altitude sickness is not uncomfortable. It is horrendous. Or not even, it's not even altitude sickness, is it? It's what was there's a different phrase for it.
Well, I've referred to it as acclimatization sickness. So
That's the one.
there's two different types of altitude sickness at a very severe end, which is HACE and HAPE. You've got high altitude cerebral edema, high altitude pulmonary edema. Now, people, that is a very extreme case. Not many people would experience that at all. You know, it's most common on mountains like Everest, where people are exposed to very high levels of altitude for a very long time. But what most people will experience when climbing mountains up to around 6,000 meters, you know, as their first introduction, because this is where it throws people, is you will experience the effects of being at altitude. And that will be nausea, headaches, fatigue, you know, being really, really tired. So there's all of these symptoms that come with being at altitude as your body is adapting to it. And as you're saying, if you happen to be a little bit more susceptible, you know, then that can feel 10 times worse. And it's something that if you are looking at taking, as we've touched on there, if you're looking at doing a all-encompassing level of training, then we've partnered with the Altitude Centre at Ultimate Adventure Travel, and you can go down to the Altitude Centre, which is based in London, and you can go through a consultation. And what you'll find out is that the way that you deal with altitude is primarily genetic. Now, your fitness will make a big difference in how much you enjoy the trip, but actually the way that your body responds to altitude is genetic. So anyway, that's a little bit about, what you would have been going through and why.
It's important because I think the thing that I would throw out there for those that just took on board what you said, obviously the way I broached it was exactly as you said, it's genetic. So I went, well, there's nothing I can do about it. If I'm going to experience it, I'm going to experience it. So why worry? But having now experienced it, and I got it on that day, and then I was fine, which is key to what I'm saying here. And then I got it again on summit night. Was when it first hit me, it knocked me off my feet. I mean, actually, we came down on what was ironically our acclimatization day, and I went to sleep for about 6 hours. Now, I was lucky that I was tired enough to do that, because when I woke up, I felt fine. And I should have listened to my own body then and realized how important getting sleep the night of summit was going to be. And what I probably should have done is maybe had a bit less sleep the night before summit night to make sure I was tired enough to sleep, or just come up with a way of making sure I'd be tired enough to sleep is what I'm really getting at. Because what I experienced was for my genetics, I got it very early, but I did acclimatize very quickly. And to throw it out there, you definitely saw it on our summit night, because I think very early on, to say I was finding it a bit tough would be an understatement. But when we got to Gilman's, as you said we would, and the sun had come up and I'd had a minute to rest and I could take on board what I'd done, that's when that's when all the other things, the attributes I did have, kicked in. Because actually from Gilman's to the summit, which I'm sure you'll tell me was one of the longest versions of that you've ever had, and back, and then all the way back down, I just went from strength to strength. I was fine. I say fine. I didn't look it. I felt quite ropey, but I'd got over the worst of it. And that's the thing that caught me out. And there was a moment, as you well know, where I was ready to stop. I was ready to give in. And it was all down to that. And I think I've now got that in my locker. So I know what that is. I know I can overcome that. If I could have done anything differently, it would have been probably to take up the altitude center, to have been able to have had that conversation and probably been told, this is what you're going to, because I think that was the thing for me, was the unknown. It was, I felt unwell and I didn't know I was going to bounce back from that. I thought it was going to get worse and worse and worse because I had no reference. Whereas potentially what I would have been told if I'd been on that and been doing it, they might well have said, you're going to experience this really quickly, but you're going to get over it equally quickly. So just hold on to that, because that would have been enough. If I'd been there on those days going, this is rough, but all I need to do is drink water, get some sleep, have something to eat, and in a couple of hours' time I'll be over it, that would have powered me through. I didn't know that. And I was working on my own guesswork and what other people were telling me as a guess. And that, more than anything, was what nearly caught me out. Well, it did catch me out, but nearly derailed me. At no other point did anything faze me enough to worry me, but that did.
I think, the more you can understand the effects of being at altitude and the more you can understand how your body is affected by it, then that does take away another element of stress. The entire purpose of this podcast has been to explain, I think, the importance of training, and whether it's mentally, physically, for altitude, for hiking and trekking, your weights, your cardio, all of those things give you more peace of mind when you're out on these types of adventures. So we're starting to run out of time, unfortunately. But what I'm quite keen to do is, if somebody hypothetically had zoned out for this entire episode and they were only tuning in now, they were just joining us now, what would you say the key takeaways are that we've just spoken about? If you had to sum up the key points for training for these adventure holidays, what would you say the most important things are that people need to know?
I think probably the two things I would say as a takeaway is that phrase I just used: be comfortable in your discomfort. So it doesn't matter really what the training is, but whatever you're doing, make sure it's uncomfortable and get used to that discomfort. And whether that is because we said about all the different types of training, but one thing I didn't say, but there's no harm in this, train in your hiking boots. It might sound crazy, but if you're doing a body weight HIIT workout, but you're wearing boots that weigh whatever boots weigh these days, I don't know, it's grams, isn't it? 35 grams, whatever a boot weighs, but it's heavier than a trainer. Well, although you're not necessarily going to be doing burpees on the mountain, you are going to, like you say, you're going to be in them for 8, 9, 10 hours consecutive days. So doing something unusual in them is going to make you get used to that discomfort. It's going to be uncomfortable, but you'll get used to it. So be comfortable in discomfort, but just in general, know your body. If you know you need to do X, Y, Z to recover better, then you're better prepared to do that. If you know you have to start or end a day in a particular way, I went out fully prepared to stretch, and I won't lie, I didn't do it. I think this next time we go out, even though it's not quite the same degree of difficulty, I'm a bit older and things are a bit different, I will be stretching. But I only know that because I've had to implement it into my lifestyle and things because I've been getting ready. So, being used to being uncomfortable, being comfortable in your discomfort and knowing your body are probably the two most important things. And you can only do that by practicing and by doing any of the things we've spoken about. If you just leave it to the last minute and go out there, you probably will still have an amazing time, but you are also allowing the potential for all sorts of mishaps and feelings that you may not want to remember.
I was listening to a podcast this morning. I was out this morning trying to get some steps in, keeping that fitness level up and in the background. And on the podcast, they were talking about training to discomfort. And apparently, and I'm sure you must know more about this than I do, but apparently they've identified a muscle in the brain that is specifically related to our experiences with discomfort. And the more times you experience discomfort, the bigger that muscle grows. And it's actually relating to when you're not taking the easy option. So for instance, going out and getting your steps in the morning, or going and doing a HIIT workout to train for Kilimanjaro, Everest Base Camp, Machu Picchu, staying in bed might be the easy option. But actually, when you do drag yourself to the gym, when you go and do that, you have actually grown the muscle in the brain, and you'll find making those harder decisions easier. So training your brain as a muscle to get used to being uncomfortable, I would say, is a huge advantage, because you saw it when we were out on our last big trip. Was I was sat in the bunk, and I said to you, I said, look, it's amazing. I said, but I know what's coming, and it's going to be a long night. And knowing that and pushing yourself through and going through it, I think if I hadn't have subjected myself to so much discomfort, in the sense of, well, not discomfort, but challenges over the years, then taking the easy option would have been even easier.
I'm mindful that when we're talking about these things, people are instantly going to draw the assumption we're talking about the gym. We're talking about very specific things. But if I just throw it out there, we've had glorious weather for the last 10 days. And being quite an active person, I've been cycling to clients when I can. And one of my clients has said, can we do that for a session? So this morning, before we did this, I've cycled to this client's house with the intention of us going out on a bike ride for his session and back. Yesterday was gloriously sunny. Today, it has been blowing a gale and thunderous rain. Now, the easy option, and the thing that everybody, including my client, was expecting, was me to send a text saying, we'll just train in the gym today. Absolutely not, because it's only uncomfortable. We're cycling on cycle paths. We can wear coats, all of those things. Is it as enjoyable as it would have been in the sunshine? No, but we weren't doing it to enjoy it. We were doing it to get fitter, to experience it. And actually, exactly what you've just been saying, doing it in an uncomfortable way means that next time, when it is sunny and we do it again, it will be infinitely more enjoyable. But we're prepared. If we go out and it's sunny and the weather turns, we're prepared. We know what it's like. And I think, exactly as your podcast you said you were listening to said, the more you experience doing things that aren't optimal, aren't in terms of enjoyment, I think actually the more you'll enjoy the things that are, but the more robust you are, and the more you'll cope and find things that aren't comfortable easier, which we all want, really.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a really fantastic point to make. Now, what I'll do to everybody for everybody who is listening is I'm going to include links to the website and some of the things that we've been talking about in the show notes below. If you are interested in taking your training to the next level, then go to ultimateadventuretravel.co.uk and onto the training section, where you'll find loads of useful information and some links as well to Wolfy. So if you are looking at getting some PT sessions, then you are able to get in touch. I know, as you said before, somebody will definitely interpret this as a sales pitch. It really isn't. You know, one of the things that we spoke about beforehand, and I've done this for so many people, is if you have any questions, please just send them over. You can drop me a message through the website. My email address is jake@ultimateadventuretravel.co.uk. So you can send me an email with any of your questions. And I'm sure the same goes for you, Wolfy, is that if you do have any questions relating to training and physical prep, then do get in touch. And we're always happy to help out, because we were in that situation as well. So hopefully you've all found it really interesting today listening. Wolfie, thank you so much for being on. I am going to throw you a curveball because there's two questions that I ask all of the guests who have been coming onto the podcast. And I haven't prepped you. I haven't told you that these questions are coming. And I've done that deliberately because I think it's great to get a natural answer. But I'll give you a little bit of time to think about it if you want. So, are you ready? Brilliant. The first question is, what's one moment from your travels that has changed the way you see the world?
It's a really good question, that. Do you know what? It's a bit of an odd one because it might not be the answer that people would expect. It is from our Kilimanjaro trip, and there are so many. There are so many moments on that trip that have been world changing, but it wasn't any of the really enjoyable ones. It wasn't the sunrise, for example, that was immense. It wasn't making it to the peak. It was a moment that I've written about in my own blog. We've spoken about. I think I've mentioned it on another podcast or video content where I was asked a similar question. We were between the sunrise on summit night. So sunrise had just happened, and you'd promised me it would change my world, and it was beautiful, but I still felt pretty awful. A load of the guys that we were with, who in my head were dead certs to make it to the top, had started to drop out. And I looked to my side, and I think you were behind me at this point. You just pretty much given me a pep talk and told me just to get on with it in the nicest possible way. And there was a guy who was with us, James, who was a former Marine, fit as a fiddle, probably one of the few on the trip who I'd stand there and say I might actually struggle to outdo in a fitness challenge. And he'd just given his rucksack to a porter and was in floods of tears because he felt like a failure. And that moment sat with me because I'd already lost my rucksack at this point. I didn't even remember a porter taking it off me, probably when they picked me up. You just had, like I say, you just given me a pep talk, and I felt like my little brother was telling me off at that point. And I had all of these emotions, but seeing him in that state, for some reason, that hardened me. And I went and grabbed him, and the two of us then did the last little bit to Gilman's together. And we got to the top, and it was probably like 10 minutes. That's all it was. But in those 10 minutes, all of those negative feelings, everything that had been eating away at me and making me think I couldn't do it, disappeared. And it was probably a combination of all of those things. But when I think back to that trip and I think about how I've been since I came back, I can't put it into words properly, but that moment was a moment of change. I think it was all in that single moment, I learned both that I had resolve, but that actually I needed other people around me to have similar resolve. You know, there was a lot going on, but that almost any challenge is manageable. You can get over anything if you have the right people around you and the right mindset. I suppose that's how I'd say it. And that moment I had exactly that, because I was on the cusp of, well, I think I told you about 4 times I was going home and you just weren't having any of it. But that moment for me, that everything hinged on that moment. And I don't know if I hadn't have seen him and had just had the conversation with him, if all of that hadn't happened in that way, hand on heart, can't say I'd have made it any further. I was that close to stopping. So that was probably the moment, because it changed the trip, but it changed everything, obviously, subsequently as well.
Wow, that's an amazing answer. I had no idea quite the level or to the extent that all of that was going on, because I know that when we had that conversation up just towards Gilman's, and all I'd said to you was, just just promise me you'll keep get the top is there
Yeah.
of Gilman's. It's just there. You've got 100 meters. Just promise me you'll get there. And you said, okay, fine, I promise. And you got there and you could suddenly see the finish. You could see the top. And I remember you looked at me and you went, you bastard. I said, what? And he said, you said, I knew, or you knew that if I'd seen that, that was going to incentivize me to keep going. And, you know, but I had no idea about the rest of it. I think that's an incredible answer. Now, the second question, you may also give the same answer for. I think you've linked the two together quite nicely. But the second question is, what has adventure travel taught you that nothing else in life has?
No, it's a very similar answer, but it's not quite the same. But it is about the resolve, I think. You know, it's for anyone that's listened to this, and you know, you may have already tested yourself physically in things, you know, whether it's assault course running, marathons, just the gym in general, CrossFit, if you know you're like-minded like me, or anything you've faced in life that you've overcome. You know, there are challenges every day. If you want to see what you're really made of, then a trip like this will do it, because I think it's fair to say, no matter who you are, you will struggle on there will be moments you will struggle on these trips. Not necessarily because of a lack of fitness or strength or anything like that. It's everything. It's the, like you said, you know, all through this, the fatigue that kicks in. You know, none of the trip is boring. It's all exciting. It's all like the scenery, especially on, you know, in Tanzania, is phenomenal. But there is an element of monotony. You are putting one foot in front of the other for hours on end for days in a row. And that's fatiguing. That's mentally fatiguing. You're not eating very well. I mean, the food, I'm not going to complain about the food, but it is different and you have to get used to it. You're not sleeping very well because, you know, if you're unfortunate enough to have a snorer next to you, that's a problem, but it's a different environment. It's a different bed. It's not, I'm not saying it's uncomfortable, but it's obviously not luxury. You're thirsty. You're hot. I mean, we had great weather, but God, are you hot? All of these things are just eating away at you for 5-6 days in a row. Then you get to summit and it's like 4 hours sleep, 5 hours sleep in the day, because obviously we started the summit at night. So you may not have slept. And then you've got what for a lot of people will probably be the hardest physical challenge they ever undertake, when, like you've said, you're in your worst possible condition. It doesn't matter how fit you were 7 days ago. You've used everything to get to there. And mentally, everything is telling you to stop. But for most of us, I think there'll be this little voice that's going, keep going, keep going. And that is where you will find what you're made of. Because if you've got what it takes, it will see you through. And if for any reason you don't, that's fine. It's not a failure, but you know how far you can go and you know where your stop is. And I think for all of us, actually knowing, you know, to leave that in a positive way, knowing where your end point is, your stop point is empowering. Whether it's the peak or not doesn't matter. It's knowing how far you can push yourself that's empowering, because then you can take that into every other element of your life and know how to push yourself, how far to push yourself, where to push yourself to. And then, you know, you can apply that to everything. It's easy then.
Such a good answer. Those are two really, really good answers. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome, buddy. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, so it's been a fantastic podcast for me. I've learned so much. I really do appreciate your time coming on. As I say, you know, we'll put links to things in the show notes below. And if anyone has got any questions, do feel free to reach out. And, you know, I'm sure one of us will be able to get in touch and help you with those training questions. But I think we're going to finish it there. Wolfy, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
No, and you, buddy. It's been a pleasure to catch up.
Speak to you soon.
Will do, buddy.
Take care.